Our next guest is Tracey from the UK. She is our first international guest, which is super cool. She reached out to me last month and offered to be on our show, so I am extremely honored. She was a PA for 25 years and is now a business homeowner. We're going to dive right into her story because she did her podcast remotely, so this is kind of a new thing. To anyone listening, I hope you enjoy the podcast and feel free to donate on the website.
My abuser was my husband. My second abuser was my ex-husband. I met him when I was 32, so that was actually 22 years ago now. I was a secretary where he started work. I'd never had any really serious relationships. The longest had been 6 months. And when I did meet men, because of my low self-esteem based on my upbringing, I basically attracted all the narcissists out there. In fact, I actually attracted two types of guys. They were either really, really cruel, outright narcissists, or what I would call the covert narcissists, who were controlling, but in a very sweet on the outside, but actually still had that control element because they were often quite childlike, and it was like they needed my help, and they became quite sort of besotted, and I found that difficult as well. So when I got to 32, I was actually quite happy to be on my own, to be honest with you. And I had pretty much done with men. And then I met my husband. He'd been married before, and he had 2 grown-up children. And initially, I didn't see anything in him, other than I was working for him. But over time, he made me feel really good about myself. I'd never had a man be like that before. He knew about my upbringing, and he was like, "Your hair's really lovely," or "You've highlighted your hair today," and say really quite nice, sweet things. Anyway, long story short, he moved to Los Angeles to open up the UK branch of the business we both worked for. He was very endearing. And although he wasn't my type per se, he was so much kinder, or seemed to be so much kinder than anyone I'd met before. He did have an insecurity about him, but I was naive as to personality types, and I didn't see that as being anything really, or really understanding what that might be. I could see that he could be quite sulky sometimes. And again, I just put that down to insecurity. And to be honest with you, I am someone who just likes to help people. And I got the impression that, that we'd make a good team. So I moved to LA to be with him. And from the day I arrived, it just all changed. It just felt really different. He wasn't cruel. There was no cruelty in our marriage whatsoever. So I need to say this. There was no physical violence. But the damage he did to me was very subtle, and it went over 20 years. The first thing he did was he used to walk around LA with his hand very tightly clasped on my neck. And it felt strange. It didn't feel loving. It felt controlling. And that really was the start of our marriage and our relationship. My first memory of abuse, I suppose, really, it's hard to say, and I think sometimes I sound like I'm struggling here. I'm not really struggling, I just want to get the words right. The hold in my neck felt strange. He stopped the terms of endearment, and he felt quite cold. So any physical intercourse didn't feel warm or loving. I kept questioning myself, kept thinking it was because of my upbringing, and maybe I was really needy. But it was like he completely changed. I was very lonely out there, and he didn't seem to want me to make any friends. And I made some friends, and he immediately said he didn't like them. I then one night wanted to go out with them, and I'm 14 years younger than him, and I asked him if he'd come with me, and he said no, he wouldn't, but he didn't want me to go either. And I laughed, thinking it was a joke. And I said, well, I want you to go. And he said, no, I'm not going to go with you. And he said, I don't want you to go. And I said, well, I'm going. And at least I stood up to him. He didn't speak to me for a whole week. And he made me feel like a child. And that pretty much was our life, really. There was episodes of that on a weekly basis. But I suppose the biggest thing that happened was we were due to move back to the UK in 2002. And prior to that, my husband had asked me if we were to move back to the UK, when we moved back to the UK, like he basically said, if you were running a business, what brands would you like? What would you do? And I came up with 3 very valid business ideas. And in 2002, he got made redundant. It turned out for the 3rd time, and I didn't know this. And he basically said, we're going to start a business, and I want you to ring the company up that you've just talked about and a year ago, and we're going to distribute the brand. That is where my life completely and utterly changed, because I knew it didn't feel like a marriage. It didn't even feel like a business partnership. It felt like control. And I said to him, but I don't want to run a business, and I want to have a family and a normal life. And in fact, I didn't want to leave the US, to be honest. I was really happy. We had an opportunity to move to San Francisco. And he said, no, we're moving back to the UK. I don't like it here. We're moving back. We're going to run this business. And I said, what about children? And he said, well, that's not convenient. And I said, why don't you just go and get a normal job? And he said, I don't want a normal job. I'm going to run a business, and I'm going to run it with you. My first wife wouldn't have made a good businesswoman. You do. And that was it. I mean, that was my life. Everything changed then. And I spent 12 years running a business with him, and I felt very slowly I was dying inside. He would often remind me that if I got emotional or tired or stressed, or told him I was overworked, and we worked ridiculous hours. So I quite often was in the office until late at night. And whenever I'd ask him for more help or support, he'd say that I was being silly, over dramatic, and he'd remind me about my childhood. He had an attitude where he would often fall out with people. He didn't like any of my friends. So gradually I had no friends, and all I really had was the business friends, which really weren't our friends because they were acquaintances. And the truth of the matter was, I wasn't very happy. And I don't want to sound like a victim here, but I did feel like a victim, obviously. But I put on a very happy, smiley face. You never know anything was wrong. And there were elements of the business I really, really liked. But from about 2010, I really knew that I was desperately unhappy. I was going to bed crying. We'd had no physical intimacy for at least 11 years. I could hardly even hold his hand. He was always telling me off, putting me down, brushing hairs off my shoulder. It's really like deeply psychological stuff. It doesn't sound anything big on the scale of things, but if you imagine every day someone sort of correcting you or fussing over or telling you your hair's out of place or you've got a cold sore on your lip, it really, really undermines your confidence. And he kept me on a low wage in the business, and I just felt like a lackey. So in 2010, I tried to verbalize how I felt with my husband. I said that I loved him, but I felt that we didn't really have a marriage and that I wasn't happy. And I felt like we needed counselling, and that I was very scared, actually. I said I was very scared for when we sold the business, what would be left, because I didn't think there was anything left. And he just completely ignored me. And I was just absolutely dying inside. I was going through my menopause, and I was just absolutely, I can hardly describe it. I just felt like I was drinking too much. I was overweight. My head was pounding all the time. I just felt really sick. I was absolutely exhausted. Wasn't eating well, wasn't sleeping well, working so hard in the business. And I think for me, really, the last 3 years of the business were really like the last straws, because he seemed to take a back seat and pretty much leave things to me, which put incredible pressure on me. And I was so exhausted. And then he basically said he wanted to leave London when we sold the business and move to the sea. And I can only really describe this period now as a bit of a period of madness, but it was like I couldn't stop. It was like I was on a freight train, and I knew it was heading towards an absolutely huge cloud, and I knew that I was very close to a nervous breakdown. Not just because of my marriage, but because of my relationship with my mother, which was dreadful. I mean, when she'd come up and stay, I could hardly speak to her. And she was always so angry with me. Even in my 40s, she was still speaking to me like I was a little girl. And between her and my husband, I just suddenly realised that I'd had enough and I wanted to be happy. And even though I knew a storm was coming, I just couldn't, I didn't want it, but I didn't want to not have it, if you know what I mean. I knew that was it, and the end was nigh, really. So in 2014, we left London very, very quickly, and we moved to the country, to Dorset. And it was dreadful, and what I mean by that is I think the day I arrived, I just literally didn't stop crying, and I mean floods of tears. I was suicidal, and I would never say that lightly, respect to those people that have taken their own lives or have been really, seriously attempting to do it. But I remember I was on the phone to my doctors every single day. She was ringing me, worried about what I might do. And my husband just seemed, it was really like the final straw, really, for me, because he seemed like he just didn't care. I mean, he'd be watching television, laughing, completely oblivious of me, how I was feeling, how unhappy I was. He got everything he wanted. We had this house. He'd moved me away. I didn't know anybody, and it felt like control all over again. But now it was even worse. We had no business. We had no distraction. It was just me and him, and I didn't know what had happened to the sales, the proceeds of the business. He wasn't going to pay me any sort of maintenance which had been agreed. He kept cancelling the direct debit. And these sound such petty things, but I can't, all I can say is that there was such subtle-ish things that went on every day. And this was a culmination. And I turned to him and I said, I can't bear it anymore. I can't. And I actually told him that I loved him, but I couldn't be with him anymore, and that I felt that we were codependent of each other, and that this wasn't a marriage. This was cruel for both parties, that the marriage had been over a long time ago, that he hadn't wanted to fight for it, and that I'd felt, my self-esteem had completely gone. He never looked at me like a woman or a wife. I felt like I don't know what it was always. I always felt like I was a commodity. I always felt like that. Like he'd found me useful, found me useful for the business. But I almost thought, well, now we're retired. Now what am I, So I said that we needed to split up, which is obviously very upsetting. But he didn't really seem to be that upset. So I moved, and I'm so much luckier than some. We had enough finances to be, splitting the money, and I could walk away. And I know that I'm really lucky in that way. But I think then that's when really the trouble started, because having been under his control for nearly 20 years, I literally realised I was just like a child. He had kept me as child, apart from in the business, but in the home life, I was a child. I couldn't start the dishwasher right. I couldn't do anything right. And because of that, I then was on my own and very, very vulnerable. That was in 2016 that we actually eventually split up. And it's been a real struggle. And it's only now in 2019, at the latter part of 2019, with a massive amount of hard work. And I took everything from going to see Tony Robbins to NLP, CBT, counselling, spiritual mentoring, trends, partying, walking, exercise, drinking far too much, but actually got myself back on track now. And it really is now in the year 2019 that I've got myself back on track. And it's been really traumatic, and my physical and my mental health have taken a real battering. I am not the person I was in 2014. And I know I'm older, and you could say that, obviously when you're in your 50s, you're going to be different. But it's left me scarred and quite traumatized, I have to say, although I'm in a lot better place now, and that's why I want to help people with my decluttering business. But my advice really to someone who has trauma or who needs to escape is that find, by whatever means necessary, escape. It's not going to be easy. It's not easy. It doesn't matter whether you've got money behind you, support, family, friends, because whatever situation you're in, you've got an attachment to these people. I mean, even today, as I'm, talking about this, I still have an attachment to both my husband and my mother, and I can honestly say that I still love them, but it isn't a healthy love, and I know that I've had to put up boundaries and also, learn to respect myself and love myself basically now, so that there's no going back. And I think for those of you that have gone through childhood trauma, and maybe now when you're reflecting back on your life, there have been a lot of issues and things have not always gone right. It's not always nice to have to go back there, but you almost have to. When I split with my husband at the same time as dealing with that, I confronted my mother. I say confrontation is probably the wrong word. I very gently said that things could no longer stay as they were. And I actually gave her a copy of The Secret to read, which is a really powerful book. And I said that things had to change and that I couldn't continue anymore. And she literally said, what damage had she done? She didn't seem to remember. And I just told her briefly. And I said, the emotional damage has been very traumatic to me. And it still is. It will always be a part of me. I always say I'm never fixed. I'm a work in progress. I am so much better than I was. And, I'm just very mindful now of what's happened. And I think for anyone out there, find the strength to do it, because you will be better and you will get to the other side. Just keep, imagining what you want from your life, and you are worth so much more than what your abuser is putting you through. And grow strong, make yourself strong. And there are ways that you can do that. There's so many great books out there now. You've got to go strong yourself. And I don't mean just hitting the gym. Obviously you could do that too, but I mean that you almost you don't have to turn cold and hard. I still say I'm exactly the same person, loving, warm and friendly, but I now have like a radar and it works really well. Trust me, down here in Dorset, there's loads of narcissists about, and isn't there everywhere? And I'm very mindful of that. So I'm much more protected now, and I'm much more stronger than I ever was. And my final words really are, we all deserve to be happy. I truly believe that we're born happy. I really do believe that. I think the minute you come out of the womb, you're born happy. Of course, you have genetic traits, but your environment is what creates you. And if you can make yourself strong, even from a young age, if you can, and protect yourself up and from the outside world, if you like, really, and don't take things personally. I know it's very difficult when things like that are happening to you, but just get yourself strong, get yourself away from your abuser. Those people tend to not change. They are just who they are. But be good with, love yourself. I think that's probably my best word. I could go on forever, as you can tell, but honestly, my best advice to anyone is love yourself, because once you love yourself, you will never ever allow anyone to treat you like that again. So I'd like to say thank you very much to the lovely Clara for inviting me to do this podcast. This is very lovely for me, speaking to you from the UK. I absolutely adore the US, and I hope to make it back there soon. And that's it from me. Thank you very much.